All right, welcome everyone. Holding by class on Noahide. Again, I want to welcome everyone. And we spoke last week about Chiddushei Dat. Chiddushei Dat, basically, we spoke about the idea of Noahides doing things that they're really not allowed to do. And Chiddushei Dat means you're basically making up a new religion. And that, the Rambam stated clear, that's not something you're allowed to do. You're adding on to something that should not be added to. And as we're going to make clear, Noahides have to know what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. Right? Certainly not everything, not everything is permissible. And there's going to be a distinction between Jews and non-Jews. Right? As we always say, God wanted everyone to be Jewish, they would have been. And so obviously there's a purpose for non-Jews, but non-Jews have to know not to straddle both worlds. Right? And that's what we're going to speak about these next number of classes. So now we're going to bring up one of the Torah giants of the last generation, according to everybody, Moshe Feinstein, of blessed memory, who with Rabbi Yosef, the Torah giant also, in the Sephardic community, one of the Torah giants of the last generation, right? Two of the most important deciphers of the code of Jewish law, right? They were main rabbinic authorities, the last generation, right? The 20th century. And Rav Moshe was a towering scholar whose influence was everywhere, right? All over the world. And his writings impacted the life of all Torah observant Jews. Interesting, he wrote a lot of response when he was in Europe. He was in Russia, before he came to the States. People thought he was a little bit crazy. Writing different cases, seemingly far out cases. And a lot of his response became practical law in America. Because there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that there are a lot of things. Sorry about that. There are a lot of things that what he was writing seemed to be, people thought, maybe a little bit far-fetched. But practically speaking, a lot of things happened in America. Right? A lot of them were very practical. So he was also important to North American Jewish communities, right, all over, not to mention Mexico, other places as well. And he was basically described, just to put it in perspective, the Maimonides of American Jewry. No question, a giant of giants. Giant of giants. So there are a number of letters that Rav Moshe wrote addressing Noahide practice. Which is interesting because not many people, not many rabbinic scholars speak about it. Right? We addressed that idea. Why not? Why that, the last authority really on the Noahide laws is the Rambam. You don't have any, really early commentators speaking about the Noahide laws. A lot of the later commentaries also. But here Rav Moshe wrote a bunch of letters addressing Noahide practice, and specifically to this concept that we're speaking about, Chiddushei Dat. Now, obviously, if we go through in depth, I'd be here till tomorrow, and I know Ray's not going to give me the time. No one's going to sit here anyway, right? It's a big day today anyway, and no one's going to watch the Super Bowl, but there's a lot to speak about. Definitely a lot to speak about. So we're going to see a summary. We'll see a summary of what Moshe said. So, he said like this, that just as Noahide to have Chiddushei Dat, it's forbidden for them to make up a new religion. It's forbidden for them to straddle the lines. Right? To straddle the lines. They're not Jews. They're not Jew wannabes. Or in my language, they're not JITs. They're not Jews in training. They're non-Jews. They're going to stay non-Jews. So there's a similar prohibition in Chiddushei Dat, which is called, right, which is called Patosif. It applies to Jews and non-Jews. Which means it prohibits Jews from creating new mitzvahs, adding to modifying existing mitzvahs. Right? That is the Torah prohibition. That's Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 1. And it also applies if a person attributes, right, or let's say better, attributes these additions in modification to Torah authority. Now, the rabbis, people will say, come on. You know, the Karaites and others will say, the rabbis add on to the Torah. Because the Torah says you're not allowed to add or subtract. I have a number of videos on Tanakh Talk discussing oral law and how oral law works. But they made a fence around the Torah. We have to understand, when the Torah says, in the book of Leviticus chapter 23, speaks about the holidays. The Torah says you have to sit in the sukkah 7 days. Gee, what's a sukkah? The booth. Very good. Okay, does it have walls? Is there a roof? What does it mean I sit into it? I sit in it. And it says you have to bring palm fronds, willows, and it says a nice smelling fruit. What's a nice smelling fruit? Some people are going to think it's a pomegranate, a quince, maybe a watermelon, a peach. No one in their right mind is going to think it's a lemon on steroids. Right? An esrog. So there are many, many things in the Torah that the Torah gives general guidelines. Don't kill, don't steal. No definitions. Right? So the Karaites only believe in the written law. But they're going to have to explain, let's say, the Torah says, don't cook a calf in its mother's milk. Says it 3 times. Why 3 times? Right? If I was a Karaite, thank God I'm not. But if I was a Karaite, I have to come up with reasons why it's mentioned 3 times. Emphasis. No. Torah doesn't mince any words. So why in the world would it mention 3 times? So I know. I understand why. Or law tells me why. I'm not allowed to cook it even if I don't eat it. I'm not allowed to eat it. I'm not allowed to derive benefit from it. 3 prohibitions. And don't kill, what does that mean? What if you killed someone by accident? What if someone tried to kill you? And the only way to stop them was to kill them? Does that apply? What about euthanasia? Is that murder? Right? A lot of questions. According to the Torah, no answers. So therefore, we need oral law. Oral law does not mean we're adding to the Torah. Now, the Karaites might say, come on, there are 39 categories of forbidden work Jews are not allowed to do on the Sabbath. You're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to carry. Third thing is, you're not allowed to light a fire. But the rabbis hold there are 36 more. There are 39. So the Karaites, they sit in the dark on Shabbos. They eat cold food on Shabbos. Because they hold you're not allowed to light a fire. So people say, look, they're adding on to the Torah. That's not adding to the Torah. That's explaining what the Torah is. And the Torah itself says you have to listen to the Kohanim. You have to listen to the Kohen and the Levite in your generation. And whatever they say, you have to listen. Whether they say left is right, right is left. You have an obligation to listen. Who are the Levites and the Kohanim? They're the teachers of all generations. Who's that? That's the rabbis. Oh, the Karaites don't want to listen to the rabbis. Not my problem. They pretty much disappeared. Even if you tell me there are 50,000 of them, when's the last time you heard, a Karaite, quote unquote, rabbi, whatever, say something important that anyone cares about? Nobody. Maybe we know a few Karaites here and there. They don't make any noise. They don't do anything. Certainly can't perpetuate it. It's like a fossil, right? That's all they're going to be. I don't care if they're 50,000. They're all going to die out eventually because you can't pass it down. So adding to the Torah means I'm adding to the mitzvah itself within Judaism, i.e., I add an extra string on my tzitzis. I put an extra compartment in my tefillin, phylacteries, whatever you want to call them. That's adding to the Torah. Well, making a fence around the Torah, that's not adding. They got people who have this problem all the time. I knock someone out with the following question. It says by King David, even to get to the Messiah by the Christians, you got to go through the line of David. Problem is, the line of David, who does it go through? Ruth. What does the Torah tell me? The Torah says the Moabite cannot enter the congregation of Israel. Ruth is a Moabite. Everyone agrees. She's a Moabite. So, how can King David come from her if she's not Jewish? So I know the answer because there's oral law. Now, if you're a Karaite or anyone else, how are you going to answer that? The Torah says clear. A Moabite will not enter the congregation of Israel. Period. No questions here. So if that's true, King David's not Jewish. No Messiah for the Christians either. Gee, what are they going to do with that? Even though according to the Gospels, going to King David, they have different ways, different genealogies, also a problem. But we're not going to go there. That's not the point. Right? But if you don't come to oral law, you don't have an answer. And I had someone who hammered me about it. So they said, fine. So I told them, all I care about is the fact you pick and choose. You cannot say, I don't hold by what the rabbis say, because you hold by the Masoretic text. You know what the Masoretic text is? Masoretic text has vowels. The Torah scroll does not have vowels. So how is a Christian in King James gonna read the Torah properly with vowels? Guess who put in the vowels? Who put in the vowels? The rabbis. Like I'm telling this person, just admit you pick and choose. Pick and choose what the rabbis say. I won't bother you. And this went on for a long time. Finally, they came back and said, okay, fine, I pick and choose. Good. That's all you have to say. They pick and choose. They don't like the rabbis say about this, say about that. Where do they get the translation from? From us. From the rabbi. Right? So, for the Torah itself, Jews are not allowed to add on to the Torah. That's what Moshe says. That's the Torah prohibition. Non-Jews, though, are they included in this? No. They're not included in the prohibition about Tosif, of adding on. Now, we know there are prohibitions against Torah study. We spoke about, go into more detail, right? And Sabbath observance, because there are specific Torah verses where they're derived from. All right, and we're going to discuss that. But it makes clear there are certain things that belong to the Jewish people. One of them is Shabbos. It's a sign between me and you, God says. Between God and the Jewish people. We're going to read it in this week's Parsha on Shabbos. So, we know that if you add on to these prohibitions, right, for non-Jews, then it's a problem. That's called Chiddushei Dat. Right, so if Baal Tosif adding on to the mitzvahs does not apply to non-Jews, then the question's going to be, where did the Rambam get it from? Where did the Rambam derive the law of Chiddushei Dat? Where did he get it from? So Moshe Feinstein explains there are commonalities between the reasons behind the prohibition. See, understanding the prohibition is one thing. That's hard enough. Some people will say. Coffman will say, what's more important is understanding where it comes from. Understanding how it works. For example, the Talmud, the Medrash, describes study of Torah in an impermissible way and keeping Shabbos as misappropriations of mitzvahs commanded only to Israel. See, it's interesting. We mentioned before, the Talmud, the Medrash says, God went to all the nations. It says, you want the Torah? So he goes to Yishmael. And Yishmael says, what's written in it? God says, don't steal. Yishmael says, what are you talking about? Don't steal. Come on. You know, the Torah says, my hand's in the hand of everyone. Everyone is in my hand. What does that mean? We're thieves. That's what it means. Simple explanation. They're thieves. That's their nature. Yishmael says, no, Muslims say we're not interested. Goes to the Christians. Well, not the Christians, goes to Esav. To Edom. Says, you want the Torah? What do they say? What's written in it? You're not allowed to kill. Right? You're not allowed to murder. One of the 10 commandments. What do you mean? Right? I got a blessing. Esav says. I got a blessing. I'm going to live by the sword. Not interested. God goes to all the nations. They reject Torah. They go to the Jewish people. You want the Torah? They said, sure. You want to know what's written in it? They say, we don't care. They say, Naaseh v'nishma. We're going to hear, and then we're going to do, then we're going to hear. We don't care what's written in it. We're going to keep it. So now in Derech HaShem, the Ramchal says, anyone who wanted to be part of the Jewish people could have joined by Abraham up until the generation of dispersion. But God had mercy. Even up until Mount Sinai, they could have joined. After that, too bad. You want to join? You got to go through conversion. That's what you have to do. Right? So now, person doesn't want to go through conversion. Right? A Noahide over here doesn't want to go through conversion, which they don't have to. They can stay a non-Jew. And then they say, we want to keep Shabbos. Wait a minute. Doesn't the Torah say it's a sign between me, God, meaning me, and the Jewish people? It's not a sign for you. You rejected Torah. So Coffman would say, what a chutzpah. What a chutzpah. God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. You didn't want it. You rejected it. Now all of a sudden, 2,000 years later, you come up and say, I want to be part of it. I want to keep it, but I don't want to convert. Who are you? Forget it. You don't deserve it. You rejected it. So I had someone tell me. They said, Rabbi, if I would have been there, my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents' generation, I wouldn't have rejected the Torah. My answer was, who cares? That doesn't matter. It's not an answer. It doesn't matter what you would have done. What matters is what happened. They rejected Torah. You're going to go through conversion. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to come back 2,000 years later, and someone's going to say, I want it. I want a part of it. Think again. Think again. Why should that be? Why should we even allow that? So it comes along to Moshe Feinstein and says that keeping Shabbos is a misappropriation because it's only given to the Jewish people. And now you come and say, I want it. Come on. It's a misappropriation. Now, there are certain commonalities. Right? If you look at other writings of the Rambam and other sources. So it comes along with Moshe Feinstein and concludes Chiddushei Dat's not the only reason over here for the prohibition of this practice. Not the only reason. There must be other reasons over here. So this is why the Rambam writes, the general rule governing these matters is this. That's why he says what he says. Because there are other reasons, which we're going to see. So it comes along with Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein says, Shabbos observance, certain types of Torah study are singled out. Why? They're singled out because they are the most severe transgression for Noahides. And the only ones involving the death penalty. We'll see what others, what the penalty is, etc. We'll go through it. But this penalty is at the hands of heaven. It doesn't happen today. It doesn't happen at the time of the temple. wasn't administered by an earthly court. That's why Maimonides says he's obligated to die for his actions, but he's not actually executed, i.e., he's liable for death by heaven. Not by a earthly court over here. Now, number 10, we said, the Rambam said, should a non-Jew perform one of the other mitzvahs, in order to receive marital benefits, that should be okay. We don't prevent him over here. Right now, the Radbaz says, he wants to perform a mitzvah, saying he's got an obligation, that we don't allow. You're not obligated. Totally not obligated. But he's allowed to perform in order to receive reward as if you did it voluntarily. If it's voluntary, what does it mean? I'm not obligated. That's why the Rambam is careful to write in order to receive merits. Because it's voluntary. Can't be obligatory. Totally can't be obligatory. That wouldn't make any sense. Because the Torah says a number of times, it's time between me and you, God says. How does that apply to non-Jews? Doesn't. Maybe tell me they could keep it voluntarily, not as an obligation. Okay, that we'll have to see. But we mentioned before, what does the Talmud state explicitly? A non-Jew performs a Jewish mitzvah for the sake of rewards, doesn't actually get rewards. Right now, if you tell him he's going to get rewards that we just mentioned, how in the world can you tell me before he doesn't get reward? Stira, contradiction. Got a contradiction here. So there's a classical debate in the Talmud as whether or not a Jew performs a mitzvah which he's not obligated is considered pious or is considered a fool. Number of sources. So it comes on the Talmud Yerushalmi, one case, and in Tractate Shabbos, chapter 1, Mishnah 2, that a Jew performs a mitzvah which is not obligated is a hedjot. What's a hedjot? A fool. He's not obligated. He's called a fool. And there are a lot of examples, many, many examples in rabbinic literature to show this. Right? One example, Code of Jewish Law in the Shulchan Aruch, in Or Chaim 639, number 2, praises one who drinks even water in his sukkah. You don't have an obligation to drink water in your sukkah. You have an obligation to have cookies, cake, breads in your sukkah, but not water. But drinking water in a sukkah is not a mitzvah. Right? So there are different ways to answer this up. Really doesn't matter. This is one example. Right? So now the question is, why is performing a voluntary mitzvah called praiseworthy and sometimes called foolish? So how are we going to explain it? You have to understand what it means, something that's non-obligatory. Right? We'll give a few examples. Sometimes the mitzvah exists, you're not actually able or obligated to fulfill it. For example, all Jews are commanded in the mitzvah of tefillin. Nevertheless, women are exempt. Women are exempt. Right? Because they're exempt from any positive time-bound commandments. If it's something bound by time, they're exempt. Now, there are certain things they'd be obligated in, even though they're exempt that they've taken on. Right? So theoretically, if a woman dons tefillin in the right way, the right intention, which doesn't exist today, because why would a woman wear tefillin today? To show she can do what a man does. She wants to be the ultra feminist and say, if you can do it, I can do it. So you're not going to wear it for the right reason. Right? Maybe you find one person in a generation will do it for the sake of heaven. Right? But the vast majority are doing it because they want to be like a man. So therefore, she may get rewards if she does it the right way. She won't be called a fool. But we should just say over here, this is only theoretical, And there are many reasons, according to Jewish law, why women don't wear tefillin. Right? It's not really the point here. I just using here as an example. Also, a Jewish child under the age of 12 or 13, right, for mitzvahs. So below that age, children are not obligated. But you have to train them. If you tell me they're not obligated, they don't have to do it. Well, try and educate an 11-year-old who's never been trained in mitzvahs before to keep mitzvahs. Forget it. Not going to be interested. I mean, maybe he will be, but you got to train him from a very young age. Nonetheless, a Jewish child is still bound in the covenant of mitzvahs, even though their specific obligation only happens when they mature. A girl at 12 in a day, a boy 13 in a day. So Moshe writes, children receive reward for these voluntary mitzvahs because they're not obligated. They can only be obligated when they do it at that age. So then what's the point? What's the point of them doing it? Practice. Till they become adults. But if you don't train them, they're never going to do it. They'll never do it. You got to train them from a young age. That's why you put them in Jewish schools, to learn. Because if you don't do that, later on in life, it's going to be much harder. Much, much harder. Now, let's say there's a case where no mitzvah exists for such a person. But he does it anyway. That person is called 100% a fool. Right? It's called a hedyot. Because not only is the action not holy, there's no spiritual benefit. He's doing something that doesn't do anything for him at all. So why is he doing it? Don't know. He's a fool. That's why he's doing it. For example, on Sukkot, there's a mitzvah to Jew and eat and sleep in the sukkah. If it's raining, you're exempt. You're exempt from eating and sleeping in the sukkah. Why? Because it's raining. Who says I have to sleep in the sukkah and get soaking wet? Comes along the Ramah, Rav Moshe, a blessed memory, in the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, or Chaim 639, number 7. And he says the Jew decides to sit in the sukkah despite the rain. Let's say it's only drizzling, and he thinks it's going to stop. That's one thing. If after a little while it's still raining, he doesn't have to sit there. Not obligated. If he sits there, he's a fool. Right? So in the case of rain, the mitzvah eating and sleeping in the sukkah is not suspended, but he can't do it. It totally ceases to exist. In such a case, the person is sitting there as a fool. Right? Why is he sitting outside the rain? Again, if he thinks the rain's going to end, it's only for a short amount of time. Maybe we'll cut him some slack. What if it's pouring rain and he's sitting out there thinking, look at the perseverance. Look at the self-sacrifice. Look at all the merit he's getting. What's God going to say? He said, you idiot. What are you doing? It's raining. Who told you to sit in the sukkah when it's raining? You're a fool. Right? Rather than being a holy act, their quote-unquote, their mitzvah becomes a foolish one. Right? Comes on the Ramban in his novella, his Torah novella, Kedushin 31a. What does the Ramban say? He says in the Jerusalem Talmud, it says anyone who performs a mitzvah which is not commanded from the Torah is a fool. This is discussing what? Someone who performs a mitzvah to which is absolutely no connection whatsoever. That's pretty severe. You got no connection. So why are you doing it? Because I want to be a super Noahide. No! Forget about being a super Noahide. You're not commanded. You're a fool. Ray, put this on your website. All these people keeping Shabbos, they're fools. Says the Jerusalem Talmud. Right? Then he's in effect adding to the Torah, making up his new religion. But if he does the mitzvah of the Torah, according to its proper performance, even though he's not commanded in it, such as women in this case, get reward. Right? But again, if a person's doing something they don't have a connection to, it's nothing. Comes on the Ramban, comes on Maimonides, and he adds over here. He says the Jew who performs the mitzvah, which he has no obligations, called a fool, because he thinks he's acting piously. But actually, he may be committing transgression. What's he doing? He's adding to the Torah. And the Torah says you're not allowed to. Here he thinks, I'm doing the biggest mitzvah. Look how righteous I am. So the Ramban says, I beg to differ. The Ramban would say, probably, he probably wouldn't say it, but I would say it. Go against Coffman's 614th commandment. What's Coffman's 614th commandment? Don't be stupid. You're doing something you have no connection to. You're a fool for doing it. Not only that, but you're adding to the Torah. That's what you're doing. You're systematically adding to the Torah. That's forbidden. That's the Torah prohibition. Now, in order to understand focusing on the mitzvahs and being a fool, you have to understand the idea of nation of ego and will. A lot of people out there got ego, big egos. Someone will say, come on, there are some rabbis that say, non-Jews can't keep Shabbos, wink, 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 but we don't think that. We don't think that. Of course we don't think that. We know better. Really? Okay. With capital E. But now, what's the $1 million question? The $1 million question is, who defines what's holy or not? Do you think we, in our cream puff generation, we can define what's good, what's not good, what's holy, what's not? No. The idea of mitzvahs obviously is ordained by who? By God himself. He defines what's holy. And he told Moshe passed it down to us. We're not thinking, I think this is holy. I'm going to do this. I'm going to change that. Well, go ahead. Because in the last generation, conservative movement changed a lot of different things. And a lot of these things, I was growing up, at Passover, you have three matzahs on the table. They had a fourth matzah. What was the fourth matzah for? Soviet Jews that couldn't get out of Soviet Union. Refuseniks, as they were known. They made a special HaGaon. We're going to have a matzah, and there are only three. But okay, we're going to have a fourth matzah. Remember Soviet Jews that couldn't get out of Russia. Wow, that's great. How long did that HaGaon last for? Not even a generation. Not even a generation. So they say, I can do what I want. I'm going to define what's holy. Okay. And what's the end result? 50% into marriage. 60% into marriage. Synagogues closing left and right because they don't have anybody to go there because no one believes in it. Boy, that's not going to work. My father's best memory, I told my father once, going to the synagogue, and on the lectern, on the bima, take the gavel and say, repeat after me. My son in Israel says, Yiskadav Yiskadash. That's the mourner's prayer. Right? I said, repeat after me. Yiskadav Yiskadash. That means they're going to die. The synagogue's going to die. A friend of my father's, I knew growing up, said, you tell your son in Israel we're not going to die. You tell him we're not going to die. The average age in the synagogue was 75. And what do you think? It's not going to die? Are you living in La La Land? Come on. Right? So what happened? 2 years later, they sold the building. Coffman was right. You're never going to die. Sure. The average age is 5. You don't have young people there. Of course it's not going to last. It's only a matter of when. You got a lot of these synagogues like that. Big. Thousands of families. Gone. Someone made a claim. I know somebody in their synagogue, they lost 40% of the people in their synagogue in 20 years. 40%. So you know what their excuse was? Why they lost so many people? The excuse was, dues are too high. people couldn't afford it. That could be true. I got a better answer. You know what Coffman's answer is? Coffman's answer is you can't pass down Judaism that way. It doesn't work. If you say it's a myth, they're not going to keep it. And if you don't keep it, your kids won't keep it. So it's a disaster waiting to happen. You might say, okay, it's also true that maybe it's too expensive to go. Fine. But see, people will do things tremendous self-sacrifice if it's worthwhile. They just don't believe it's worthwhile. That's what happens. That's exactly what happens. So who defines what's holy or not? Someone who can't read Hebrew and gives classes in Kabbalah? Yeah, I don't know. I would think not. You can't walk before you learn how to crawl. You can't study calculus unless you know trigonometry, right? Or algebra. These are the people I want to listen to. Wink, wink. That's what I want to listen to? I don't think so. So therefore, our will to a large degree is irrelevant, isn't it? Does it matter what I think? Doesn't matter. Because the Torah tells me what I'm obligated to do. The rabbis tell me what I'm obligated to do. So our duty, which a lot of people have a lot of problems with, and that is we have to serve God to nullify bittul ha-yeshuas, which means to nullify our will in the search for truth. To serve God the way He deserves to be served, not what I think, not Torah made in America or Jamaica or anywhere. Doesn't matter what I think. It's irrelevant what I think. What's relevant is what God tells us to do. What's relevant is how God passed it to Moshe. Moshe passed it down. We have an obligation to listen to the rabbis. Doesn't matter what I think. It's irrelevant. So we have to understand what God's will is. Right? We have to understand how to fulfill it. To do what we're supposed to do and not do what we're not supposed to do. And not make up things as we go up. I think I can do this. I'm going to keep Shabbos. Right? As a non-Jew. Shabbos apply to you? Doesn't God say it's a sign between me and the Jewish people a number of times? Yes, He does. What do you do with that? Doesn't matter. I get a mitzvah for doing it. Not if you add to it. That's Chiddushei Dat. That's adding to the Torah. So the objective guidepost for determining God's will is studying the Torah and nullifying your will to His. It's an explicit mission, Pirkei Avos. Says in the ethics of our fathers, my will should be like His will. My will, in other words, whatever God says, whatever His will is, that's what I do. That's what I keep. Now, do I always do the right thing? Maybe not. We have to try harder. We have to work harder. Very good. But at the end of the day, it's about nullifying our will to His. Period. That's what it is. It's nullifying our will to His. According to the way the Torah is elucidated, handed down from time more of the generation. Now, we do have certain leeway. Right? We do have a certain leeway. Right? The leeway is that there are certain things that I can beautify a mitzvah. I can declare certain things as holy. I can set aside things for a service to God. Right? We have free will. We can do these things. But if a person, if a Jew decides to do a mitzvah where it clearly does not apply, then what are they doing? They're forcing their will upon God. That's not Judaism anymore. That's saying I know better. And unfortunately, I know enough people like that. I know better. What do you know? You can't even read Hebrew, for goodness sakes. What are you going to tell me? You know. Right? If a Jewish farmer in the Midwest, this is a good example. It's actually a funny example. Right? He decides not to work his field in the sabbatical year. It's a command in the Torah. Sabbatical year, you don't work your field. Where? In Israel. Not in the Midwest. Not in Hawaii. Not in any other country. Right? You say, I'm doing it for God. Yeah, it's called a hedgehog. It's called a fool. Because everybody knows, if you don't know, you'll know now, where does the sabbatical year apply? It applies in Israel. A friend of mine was on a plane once. This woman tells him, yeah, only by the sabbatical year, and I don't grow things in my garden, and this and that. He pointed out, by the way, the Torah says it's only in Israel, not in America. It doesn't apply in America. Right? That person's a fool. They don't know. Right? The mitzvah only exists in Israel. Right? And God's desire is only that the Holy Land rests, not any other place. Made clear in the Torah, very clear. If a person rests in another non-holy land in the sabbatical year, what is that going to do? You're going to say that's more important than Israel. That diminishes the importance over here. In the mitzvah of the sabbatical year. Not only that, the farmer's endangering his livelihood, which is also foolish. And if he loses his farm or creates tension among his family, or business association is not going to work the land because he's a religious fanatic. He's not a religious fanatic. I beg to differ. He's a religious idiot who doesn't know. Right? He doesn't know over here. So somebody who does such a thing, you daven for them, you pray for them, then they shouldn't be stupid. Right? That might be Coffman's 615th commandment. Don't be a moron. Right? In other words, if you're not gonna work the land, you live in Israel, don't work the land, not anywhere else. That's pretty clear according to the Torah. So all of this foregoing applies to Jews. And we do a lot of things stringently against the idea of forcing their will upon God. God's will, not the other way around. Doesn't matter what I think, doesn't matter what I do, so to speak. God has his will, I have to follow it. That's it. That's my obligation. I don't think, I think this. I think that. God doesn't care what I think. A lot of people also don't care what I think. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what I think. I have to follow what God says. Now, if that's the case for Jews, going to make a big jump here. Rav Moshe wonders, will we assume that's the same thing for Noahide also? Does it make a difference between Jews and non-Jews? Now, what would be the obvious answer? Last time I checked, there are no two Torahs. So one Torah. Right? The fundamental mechanics of Torah apply to non-Jews. So if a person is going to adopt a Noahide entity, can't have more than one Torah. Same thing that the laws that govern Jewish observance, 613 commandments, also govern the Noahide of the 7 mitzvahs. Just like we have a command about Tosif, we're not allowed to add to the Torah. Noahide to have a law, it's called Chiddushei Dat. They're also not allowed to add on. It's also a prohibition over here, Torah prohibition. And if a person does, a Jew or a non-Jew, they add on to what they're not supposed to do, guess what? You're a fool. You're a fool for doing such a thing. Gives you the right. Now, looking at the Rambam and the Radbaz, we said before, a non-Jew delves into Torah is obligated to die because they're only allowed to study their own commandments. Also, a non-Jew rests on a weekday, observing a weekday like the Sabbath, also forbidden because they're not allowed to make a festival for himself. These are the most severe, as we mentioned before. That's why they're singled out by the Gemara and by the Rambam. Now, what's the general rule? The general rule is you can't originate a new religion. Chiddushei Dat. Not allowed to do such a thing. Right? So, the prohibition here, I think, oh, maybe it's only limited to Shabbos. Maybe it's only limited to festivals. Torah study applies to all mitzvahs of the Torah. It's transgressed whether a non-Jew creates a new religious practice, behaves as if he's obligated. Now, we know people out there, maybe they're going to say, well, I'm not obligated. I'm doing it not of obligation. I'm doing it to do reward, to get reward. Well, are they obligated or not? Right? That's the question. Are they obligated or not? Because the reality is, they are doing something they're not allowed to do. So even if they're going to get reward, there's a limit. The reason there's a limit is because, again, I have this idea of Chiddushei Dat. So now what's the question? So the question over here is either converts or accepts all the mitzvahs. One or the other. Right? You're not going to have it either way. Right? 100% is one or the other. Right? It's going to be one or the other. So the point over here is that maybe the most important thing of these prohibitions of Chiddushei Dat doesn't exist to reduce or restrict the identity of a Noahide. Similarly, if they have the Torah, right, by Baltos, by a Jew, also doesn't exist to reduce or restrict the identity of a Jew. What does it do? Chiddushei Dat also exists to define the boundaries. That's the whole point. It exists over here because of boundaries. Right? And it relates where Judaism ends and Noahism begins. Again, Coffman's language is put up or shut up. That's what you got to do. Either you got to convert, or not. Not sure what I can do here. Maybe I'll go out and come back in 1 second. Okay, let's say this better. See if you can hear me now. Hopefully this is better. Okay, good. So what do we have over here? So we have either Coffman's language, put up or shut up. Either you're going to convert or not. Now, Noahides in general may drink from the same well, maybe share many values, but they're distinct. They don't change. They shouldn't cross over. That's the point. They shouldn't cross over. Right? Definitely shouldn't cross over. So they shouldn't mix over here. So what are we going to say? That Noahism, what would a person think? A person may think that it's not Judaism for non-Jews. That's not what it is. That's not what it represents. And it's not a way for non-Jews to participate in Judaism. They're separate. They have the same core, maybe. Comes from the same place, but it's not the same thing. So a non-Jew wants to observe Jewish ritual or festivals, comes on the Rambam and says, you want to do that? That's great. We call it conversion. Now, the next thing is a non-Jew delves into Torah or Shabbos or any of these other religious practices. He gets beaten, punished, obligated to die for his actions. What's it talking about? Where a non-Jew lives under Jewish sovereignty. Then he's liable for observing these mitzvahs, and he's liable to death again at the hands of heaven. Right? The hands of heaven. Now, the question is, what about a non-Jew who wishes to perform any of the mitzvahs? We should allow them. Why not? So the prohibition is nowhere severe Shabbat, festivals, or Torah study. And a person could choose to do other Torah commands they want. Within boundaries. Got to have boundaries here. But if they want to do other mitzvahs, right, a non-Jew should only occasionally perform other ones. But if they regularly observe one of the mitzvahs, that's a problem. That's called Chiddushei Dat. But what if they want to do it for enjoyment, for merit, for benefit? So the Radbaz says, you want to perform a mitzvah, and you're saying over here that what? You're saying that he's got an obligation in the matter. We don't know how to do so. But if he's doing it for rewards, different issue. Comes along with Moshe Feinstein, and he says any spiritual motivation may make the mitzvah religious acts. And I don't believe for 1 second that some people are going to say, you know what? I'm only doing it to get reward. Right? 100%, I'm only doing it to get reward. That I don't believe. 100% I don't believe. They're doing it as a religious act. That's why they're doing it. It's not about just, I'm getting reward, I feel good about it, all these things. Not about that. They're doing it because, for ulterior motives. And the ulterior motive is it's a religious act. So the only permissible motivation, right, can only be ulterior. Therefore, if it's ulterior and on spiritual motives, why would they keep kosher many other mitzvahs? They have an alternative motive over here. Right? We have an alternative motive over here. So, the Rambam's saying that although the non-Jew cannot perform a mitzvah because of a spiritual connection or need, and most Noahide's going to say that's why they're doing it, because they don't have their own mitzvahs, or so many, and they have a need. That's a problem. Right? He may do it for the obligation over here, for reward. That might be a different issue. So that's permitted motivation if they're doing it for what? If they're doing it for reward. But it comes along with Moshe Feinstein and says that this only pertains to the motivation. But you don't get reward for doing the mitzvah. Why? Why not? Because the Talmud explicitly learns that non-Jew doesn't receive a reward if he performs such a mitzvah. Nevertheless, the mitzvah itself provide a logical, tangible, real-world benefits. The benefit for them. Not about ulterior motives. Now, a person may say, you know what? You know why it's being done? Because I feel spiritually inclined. Survey says, that's not the answer. It had nothing to do with being spiritually inclined. Person should want to do it for one very simple reason. Because they're going to get reward for it. So we should not prevent them from doing it. But by Shabbos, festivals, certain type of Torah study, so we don't stop a non-Jew from trying to do them. However, we're not encouraging. Even though someone will say, I'm only doing it for the mitzvah, it's not something we want to encourage because these things are pretty severe. And I don't believe anyone today is doing it for that reason. They're doing it because they want to do it. They want to get reward. Right? Not just reward. It's a ritual. Right? It's a spiritual thing they want to do. Not just to get reward. Comes along Rav Nissim Gaon. And Rav Nissim Gaon says in his introduction to Tractate Brachot, he says, not all the 7 laws in the derivations require revelation. For example, the obligation of recognizing God, to obey Him, and the obligation to serve Him are rational. I could have determined that logically. What do I need? God to tell me. So there's certain things that I would understand already. So there's certain aspects of Noahide worship and practice certainly permitted a proper, again, not because they're commanded by the Torah, but because they're compelled by logic, by basic common sense, religious needs. It comes along with Moshe Feinstein, and he says there's certain mitzvahs, the religious acts that are permitted. Maybe even done according to other details. That can include prayers, other certain types of offerings, etc. So it comes along with Moshe Weiner. Moshe Weiner in his book, Sheva Mitzvos HaShem, i.e. the divine codes. And Moshe Weiner says that if you look at the different explanations of the Rambam, he decides that according to Torah law, to Jewish law, he goes with Rav Moshe Feinstein. He agrees with all the different things over here. But he elucidates over here, and he says like this, that he goes further. He explains there are many mitzvahs whose performance don't have to be motivated by spirituality or rewards, but have an immediate real-world benefit. In other words, the person may be obligated to do it for Noahides to do. Right? In other words, there might be tremendous benefit by doing it right now. Tremendous benefit. So therefore, he might be obligated to do it in such a case. Right? And the last thing here is that should a non-Jew want to perform the Torah's other mitzvahs, what reason? To get reward, benefit. Then we don't prevent it. Rabbi Weiner says that the word schar normally is understood as merits or benefit. Right? But he explains that the Rambam uses this word to imply benefit. Usually it means merit. Over here he's telling me it means merit or benefit. So if a Noahide wants to adopt a mitzvah that gives him real world material or social benefit, he's allowed to, even praiseworthy. So he can do such a mitzvah regularly. It's not a problem, even according to all the Torah details. Now, what does that mean? Right, that would include all of those that are ben adam l'chavero, mitzvahs between man and man. Honoring parents, tzedakah, giving charity, observing the prohibitions of tzar ba'al chayim, cruelty to animals, observing the laws of prohibited speech, which I would call a what do you call it? A moral imperative. Right, many other examples. So the number of religious observances that are between man and God, what we call ben adam l'mako, that also can be observed, we're going to see. So what's the conclusion over here? The conclusion is, on Chiddushei Dat, they give us a guideline and principles whether or not a Jewish mitzvah may be practiced by a Noahide or not. Yeah, so I see there are a few questions here. So when it comes to making festivals, making holidays, prohibition is making them, if an Noahide says God told me, right? If they say I'm doing it because I'm obligated, they're not allowed to, right? But, if they're doing it for the only reason that they want to get reward, they want to get merit. So technically they should be allowed to, even though really the prohibition is very severe. But I would say, why are most Noahides doing that? Why are they doing such a thing? So I would say they're doing it. Oh, there we go. That they're doing it for one very simple reason. And the reason is because it's a religious act. That's why they're doing it. You can say, come on, I'm going to have a meal with my family Friday night. Or I'm going to have a meal with my family Shabbos day. But I would ask the question, why is the person really doing it? Let's get into their psyche. Why are they really doing it? They're doing it as they're not going to say it's a religious obligation. Right? That would be forbidden. You say, why can't I do it? Because you go down a very slippery slope over here. We're going to see what aspects the person may be allowed to do, or not. Right? But the point is, it's a religious act. They won't light candles. They won't say the blessing. They'll do other things. Again, when you see what people do, you hear what people do out there in the world, quote unquote, in the real world. What do you see? It's a hodgepodge. Some people do more, some people do less. It's a hodgepodge. And why do people want to do more? Because they are more spiritually inclined. But that's going down a slippery slope, saying I'm obligated. I want to do it as ritual. Because there's very little ritual by Noahides. That's a problem. Right? And we're going to go through this further, but But if you're doing it because of obligation, that's definitely an issue. But I don't believe for 1 second a lot of these people keeping what they're keeping, they're not doing it as a ritual. That I don't believe. And if they tell me they're not doing it for that reason, they're lying. I don't think they're telling the truth. Because they want to do more than, they want to straddle that line. People I'm thinking of, they want to straddle that line. So someone asks, can we do them to just learn? So if you want to learn about it, very good. There's a lot to learn. There are certain things, if it makes rational sense, you can learn the laws. Right? You want to learn the laws of Lashon Hara, honoring parents? Right? Then we can do so, even though my Rebbe would hold, Lashon Hara doesn't apply. A lot of different things about Lashon Hara don't apply to non-Jews. It doesn't make rational sense in many ways. Right? But again, I would say there's a fine line you got to be careful with. Because you could straddle that line. It's like saying, I want to delve into it, I want to learn more, but not trying to be too Jewish. How, what's the definition over here? Right? What did we say before? You don't want to Judaize Noahism. It's its own thing. You don't want to put Jewish ritual to Noahide in general. Because what do we say? Either you're going to convert or not. You're going to go one way or the other. Does it mean a person can't learn? No, it doesn't mean that. There's plenty what to learn, as a non-Jew, no question. So you want to learn some of these things in depth that apply, fine. Or even if they don't apply, again, you don't want to straddle both worlds. That's the issue. You still have to have boundaries. So if there are clear-cut boundaries, good. If not, you got to be careful. Someone says, if had an argument about celebrating July 4th. What's the problem with July 4th for a Jew? Make it easy. How does it apply for a Jew? Applies for a Jew because we don't go in the ways of non-Jews. Not Thanksgiving, not this. It's not a religious holiday per se. Even though Victor Miller, blessed memory, disagreed, he claimed that Thanksgiving was a pagan thing or whatever. So he holds that, it's a prohibition for that. But most rabbinical authorities hold it's a secular thing. It wasn't a religious thing. But going to the ways of non-Jews is also forbidden. As a Jew. Doesn't necessarily apply to a non-Jew. Right? So a non-Jew, if they want to participate in 4th of July, shouldn't be an issue. If they want to. That's not making a new religion. There are some Jews, probably modern Orthodox Jews, celebrate July 4th. Definitely some modern Orthodox Jews celebrate Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is all about turkey and football, not necessarily in that order. So you're right, it might not be a religious thing, and they may be thankful for being in America and all that. But you know what? It's also, you're not allowed to go in the ways of non-Jews. That's a Torah prohibition. So if you're not allowed to go in the ways of non-Jews, Jews shouldn't do it, period. Not Thanksgiving, not any of these things. Not Father's Day, not Mother's Day, even though they're a little more innocuous. It's just, these are holidays for, for Hallmark. In general, they're the ones that make the money on it. They can save money, send e-cards, whatever. But, for non-Jews, they could do it. It's not adding on over here. Is it the way of going in the way of the non-Jews? I would say, yeah, but doesn't, for a Jew, that would apply. It wouldn't apply to a non-Jew. Would a non-Jew have to take that on? No. Certainly not at all. Yeah, any other, I made a video for controversial issues about celebrating birthdays. Is there an idea to celebrate birthdays for Jews? I mean, there are. Some are significant. Right? But in general, is that going in the way of non-Jews or not? So I spoke about that whole idea. So, if you go to my YouTube channel, Rabbi Chaim Coffman, and there's a playlist of controversial issues, it's there somewhere. Right? There are about more than 100 videos there, but whatever, it's there. You can take a look over there. Yeah. Any other questions about anything brought up today about Rav Moshe Feinstein? about Chiddushei Dat, how it all works, straddling the lines, boundaries, all that. Any questions on any of that? Or any general questions?
I do have another question because
Okay, go ahead.
sorry, I would have typed it, but it's it's kind
Yeah,
of
no, understood. It's
having a
fine.
hard time.
Yeah.
So we just not too long ago we Hanukkah passed.
Right.
I've gotten questions about Hanukkah and things like that. So I kind of wanted to bring that up because we're talking about different holidays and things like that because I've heard so many different things. So I just wanted to ask you about that, especially when it comes to non-Jews, because there's
The funny thing
just so
about
much
Hanukkah,
disinformation about that.
the
Oh,
funny thing
sorry.
about Hanukkah in general is that Hanukkah is a totally rabbinical holiday. It's the last holiday that we have, the last revealed miracle that we have. It was a revealed miracle, an open miracle. Now, interesting enough, there's a whole question. There's a whole question by, a convert. Can a convert make the second blessing that God did this miracle for our forefathers? Well, if they convert, the answer is yeah, they could. Why? Because Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov are now their forefathers because they converted. But it's a totally rabbinical holiday. The other holidays are all Torah prescribed, right? It's all Torah prescribed. If it's all, if it's rabbinic and Purim, no different. That's not a revealed miracle by Purim. And Purim's it's a fun time, and all that. So again, it's like we said before. Why is the person doing it? Are they doing it because they want to be like Jews? Or are they doing it because, they're doing it for the sake of the mitzvah? Or they're doing it because they enjoy it. It has nothing to do with ritual. What does it represent? You have to ask the question, what does it represent for them? What does it represent? That's the question. If it represents a person's doing it, and I guarantee a lot of people are going to be doing it. Why? Because it's a ritual thing. It's a spiritual thing. They want to connect. When I say spiritual, I mean spiritual ritual. They want to connect. They want to do that. It's not just about the benefit, right? In the next world. Because I don't hear these super Noahide fools talking about that. They're not talking about that. They're not talking about, oh yeah, I'm not commanded, and there's no, I know there's no spiritual benefit, I'm going to do it anyway. They're not saying that. Not at all. They're saying I can tap in. I can do what I want. That's the problem. They're tapping in something that doesn't belong to them. That's the issue. Right? So now, you say, I'm not going to make the blessings. I'm just going to light the candles. Right? Maybe it's less of an issue because it's rabbinic in nature. Maybe it's much less of an issue. It's not like Shabbos or Torah study or anything else. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's true, but I guarantee it's just like a Jewish woman wants to wear a tallis. She wants to wear a prayer shawl. Why does she want to wear a prayer shawl? Because men wear prayer shawl. What it represents, this, that. She wants to do it because she wants to be like a man. So she's a feminist. We know why she's doing it. You never write just women wanting to do it. They want to stay women, not men. They don't say, thank God I'm not a man. They say, thank God I'm creating God's image. We say, thank God we're not a woman because of obligations. We have many more obligations. That's why we say, thank God I'm not a slave. Thank God I'm not a woman. Etc. These women, these feminists say, yeah, I want to do what men do. I can do. It's not about what you can do. It's not about what you think. We said before. It doesn't matter what a person thinks. Question is, am I allowed to do it or not? That's the question. Right? That is the question. someone asked, are any books could recommend that go deeper into Chiddushei Dat? Chiddushei Dat. I have to look that up. I think Rabbi Weiner's book goes into it, right? The Divine Code thing that goes into it. Someone asks if Chiddushei Dat protects Noahide identity. Yeah. Why does it protect them? Because they're not Jew wannabes. These super Noahide fools are Jew wannabes. They just don't want to convert, or they can't convert. But they want to be like Jews to a great extent. That's the difference. That's what it means. What this does is it sets up boundaries. Setting up boundaries means you're not going to straddle one way or the other. Either you're going to be a Noahide or you're going to convert, nothing in between. And these idiots are going to say, I can do this. I got the Rambam's proof over here. I can do this. I can keep Shabbos. I can do what I want. So convert. I don't want to convert. I can't convert. So this sets up boundaries. But you got people that want to do their own thing. And when you want to do your own thing, that's not Torah. We're supposed to be subservient to God, not to our own desires, not to our own ego. That's for sure. So it sets up boundaries. That's what it does. Totally sets up boundaries. That's what the purpose is. Now someone asks, I don't know if I have a simple answer here. Isaiah 19:19. Let's see what it says. Look it up here. Torah says on that day, there'll be 5 cities in Egypt speak the language of Canaan. Swear by the name of God, Master of Legions. One of them we call it the city of the sun. Yeah, it's talking about a day where Egypt's going to worship the one true God. That's what it sounds like. That Hebrew Egyptian eyewitnesses to the miracle in Jerusalem will set up in Egypt. Communities of people who are faithful to God. That's what it means. They're going to be communities. Communities in Egypt that are going to be faithful to God. Going to believe in one God. Right, one of the commentaries says that city, one of the cities is called the city of the sun, but it was later destroyed. As Rashi says, Jeremiah chapter 43, verse 13. That's simple explanation. Right, more deep, I'd have to look it up more, but that's what it seems to represent. In verse 20, what does verse 20 say? And there'll be a sign and witness to HaShem, Master of Legions, in the land of Egypt. Crowd to HaShem because they're oppressors. He will send them a savior and a leader to deliver them. But again, so they're going to believe in God. They're going to believe in the one true God. Someone's going to attack them. That's what it sounds like. They're going to get oppressed. They're going to cry out to God. Because before they didn't do that. Before they, listened to Pharaoh and got brainwashed and all that. So what? So now they're gonna be in trouble. But they believe in the one God. So they're going to have an opportunity to be able to pray to the one God that he should save them. Anyway, more detail? I don't know. I have to look it up. Yeah, any other questions? All right, I think next week we're going to hit Chiddushei Dat as well. So if there are no other questions, then I'm going to sign out. Anyone has any questions, send me an email at Rabbi Chaim Coffman at gmail.com, or you can find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Coffman, or Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism. You can find me there just as well. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out. Wish everyone a good middle of the day, or almost end of the day for me, and everyone have a great rest of the week.